Speaking the complete and ultimate truth to power. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of people. Hello, John.
Hello, sir.
Right, the chapter of discussion continues and it's getting even more interesting.
Yes, so just like we did in our last show, this week has been a very monumental week. So I've made a confidential supplementary submission to the ASIC inquiry about the package, where we go into specific names and specific individuals who are involved across the country, but also about someone within Australia's ruling elite who is linked to the package. So that is named, and there are very legitimate reasons. So obviously, Martin, when you put in a submission as part of an inquiry, you have to be very specific about why should the inquiry look at something, and you could link it back to the terms of reference. So that's what I've attempted to do, and I've said to the inquiry, consistent with your terms of reference, this package and the investigation around it is quite unique. There are some members of the ruling elite who have either direct or indirect linkages to it, and that creates a whole host of both potential real and real implications, and some implications even in terms of perception. So therefore, I think the Parliament needs to look at the whole situation. But the important point of this show, Martin, is to talk about why was I able to do this week, because even as I've travelled through legal circles over the last few months, what we're about to talk to today is not fully appreciated, and we're going to talk about parliamentary privilege and what that actually means, what that actually implies. Because some people thought that the title of the show, which, and for the record, I came up with the title, but some people thought this was just another Adams North exaggerated hyperbole sort of attempt. And the reality is that we are lucky in this country that we can say certain things about certain people in power, whereas in other countries, you can't. And so, because if you do speak critical of those of the ruling elite, the inner circle of, the supreme elite, the inner circle, that could result in arrest. It could result in hard labour. It could result in execution. And that could be if you're speaking critically of them. That could be if you're, if you attempt to embarrass them by releasing embarrassing information or state secrets or whatever the case may be. And obviously, to some degree, even in the West, we've seen Julian Assange go through this whole sort of in terms of this situation, and he's still locked up in solitary confinement after all these years. And but obviously Assange is not the typical norm in terms of Western countries. But it is true that the document I submitted to Parliament today, so in terms of earlier this week, had it been in North Korea, had it been in Iran, had it been in a whole host of countries in the contemporary world, I would have been arrested immediately. And in North Korea, I likely would have been put to death because it's critical of the regime. And in certain countries around the world, those things cannot happen. So this is not an attempt at hyperbole. And what we're doing here, and so the other point I hope I can make, Martin, is that hopefully that over the last few years we've developed a track record of substance and in terms of achieving things. So when we say something, we're not just trying to mislead the audience. We're saying it because there's a very real and deliberate purpose behind what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's worth underscoring, John. We're not doing this for clicks, right? We're doing this because we want to make a difference and because there are real issues of substance which need to be addressed, and actually issues which quite often are not being covered appropriately in perhaps the more mainstream media.
Yes, and so in the early part of our show, we were looking at more the general analysis type, and now we're really getting into some meat and bones of real things that are happening in the real world. And so one of the interesting things as I was preparing for this show, Martin, was I found a book in my collection, and it's called Crossing Hitler. And so why don't we put this on the screen, because here's a story of someone who, before Hitler took power, there was a trial, I think it was in Berlin, or somewhere in Germany, where 4 Nazis were put on trial for attempted murder because there was a lot of violence between Nazis and communists, and these 4 individuals were put on trial by the Weimar Republic, and then Hitler was called as a witness as part of the trial, and so there were numerous times in the various trials involving Nazis where Hitler was a regular witness, and he was asked to testify about, well, these people are part of your organization, you're the leader. Did you sanction this violence? Did you give the order? All these sort of things. And generally, Hitler would, and again, this is pre-power. He just denied everything. We're doing everything by the book. We're doing things legally. We denounce violence. We're pro-peace. We just don't like the way Germany is, and we want to change it through the parliamentary system. So in this situation, Martin, was that there was a lawyer called Hans Litten. And so he was an anti-Nazi, and so when he called Hitler, and he was a lawyer in this particular trial, when he called Hitler and put him on the stand, he aggressively pursued him about his state of knowledge about violence and tactics within the Nazi Party, to such an extent that he embarrassed Hitler in the court. Hitler got extremely angry. And what happened as a result of that is that once Hitler took power and became the chancellor and started setting up the concentration camps within Germany, well, this lawyer was one of the first targets, and he was plucked off the street because he embarrassed Hitler in court, put into a concentration camp, kept him there for 5 years under horrendous conditions. And unfortunately, the lawyer couldn't take it anymore, and he committed suicide. And that's what this book, this is what this book is all about. And this is a very unique sort of story in terms of people who had the guts before Hitler became the leader to actually challenge him and actually to press him aggressively. And when someone had the balls to do that, basically their life spiraled out of control, and they ended up dead prematurely because in certain parts of the world, there are things that just cannot be said.
Yes, and I think, John, that this is a very important conversation now, not least because if you take even things like social media, for example, and the way that social media is being controlled, in some ways, a good example in India currently at the moment, there's stuff that's being taken down in India because the political party there don't want it to show it, right? So with the way that the media system works at the moment, there are more controls that are actually being put in place and less ability for people to actually express views and opinions. And as you say, in some cases, if you start talking about those sorts of things, then you're going to get your head chopped off.
Yes, and now when it comes to Australia, Martin, is that while we won't face the same consequences as a totalitarian regime, there are still immense risks of saying certain things in this country, both in terms of potentially losing your job, depending on what you say and how you say it, but in terms of legally, in terms of being sued, in terms of defamation. Yep. And in the last little while, we've seen a number of politicians who have decided to take legal proceedings against various people. I mean, even in the recent Higgins case, the former Defence Minister Linda Reynolds has actually commenced proceedings in terms of going after someone involved in that camp. And there was like the former member for Bowman, Andrew Laming. He decided to sue Channel 9 and was able to get a hefty payment settlement. He won that case. So there is no short of, Peter Dutton, when he was a minister in the last few years, he decided to sue someone, and on that occasion he actually lost. So there are politicians who are willing to sue, and they're willing to run up the legal costs of various people in order to act as a deterrent. Don't say things about me or my party or whatever the case may be. So now, that's an important point. Now, when we get to the Wolf of Oi Woi, and in terms of this Four Corners program that was on the 29th of August last year. So we covered this, and there was a particular whistleblower who was a feature of that program called Daniel Flett, and he was the person who said that he went to ASIC, blew the whistle through the proper channels, and ASIC did nothing about it. And so just to remind our audience who this person is, why don't we just play the clip?
Know how the hell he'd be allowed to do it. It's a question that demands answers from the entity responsible for policing all of this, the corporate watchdog ASIC.
Did you report Grey Wolf to ASIC?
Yes.
I did complaints with ASIC too.
Complained to ASIC, yep. Nothing ever happened.
We never ever got a reply.
We can reveal the complaints to ASIC span more than a decade.
Once again, our so-called government watchdog sits on their arse and does nothing.
In a written statement to Four Corners, ASIC said it had acted on one complaint about Grey Wolf failing to keep proper financial records. As for the remaining complaints about Grey Wolf and Lithium Gold Mines Australia, ASIC determined no further action would be taken, citing insufficient evidence.
I blew the whistle. I raised the alarm, gave all the evidence through the proper channels, and not even a phone call. Email, nothing. I could have given them whatever they wanted. Not a peep from them.
Yep. It still really shocks me, that comment.
Yes. Well, I've got even a bigger shock for you, Martin, is that this week I had the opportunity to speak to Mr. Flett. It took me 2 months to get him on the phone, but we had a conversation, and the thing that he told me over the phone was that Four Corners only told a small fraction of the story, and the reason why the Four Corners didn't tell the full story was because of Four Corners and the ABC had received a range of legal threats that if certain things were broadcast on national TV, they would go straight to they would be taken straight to court. So Four Corners made both a legal and a commercial decision about what they thought they could get away with. But there is a lot more, according to Mr. Flett, a lot more damaging information that he has about certain individuals. And so now, part of the conversation I had with him was about the inquiry, told him how the submission deadline has now been extended to the 28th of February. So he is now planning to make a submission to the inquiry, and he will be able to tell the Parliament certain things that Four Corners did not feel legally comfortable to. They didn't feel comfortable that they could put on national TV. And so the question is, why can I go to Parliament and say certain things that I'm not comfortable to say publicly? And why can Mr. Flett also go to Parliament and say things that Four Corners and the ABC basically said we can't broadcast this on national TV? And the reason is parliamentary privilege. So we've discussed this in the past. Parliamentary privilege is the only place in this country where you have the ultimate level of free speech. And so that's either the federal parliament or in terms of the state parliaments. So, and parliamentary privilege comes from an important historical episode during England where King Charles I attempted to storm into Parliament with his troops to arrest 5 members of the House of Commons because they dare say things negative about the king. And so there's a very important clip from the 1970 movie Cromwell that shows what happened during this critical piece of history. And why don't we play that clip?
Has time and again expressed its wholehearted loyalty to the crown. Does Parliament await in vain for a gesture?
The King is coming with a warrant to arrest you, John Hampden, Henry Arton, Sir Arthur Heselrigg, and Oliver Cromwell on the charge of high treason. I suggest you leave immediately.
That if the issues that divide the King from his country be not soon resolved, then these issues may soon divide the nation.
The King is coming with a warrant for our arrest. We must leave at once. Oliver, your name is on it. Come!
My lord! Gentlemen! The King comes! He comes with 100 men at arms! Stand aside, gentlemen, if you please. Halt!
Open in the name of the king!
Speaker. Gentlemen, you must pardon this infringement of your privilege, but I will not detain you long. Mr. Speaker, I must make bold with your chair. I have here a warrant for the arrest of 5 members of this House. John Pym, Henry Ireton, John Hampden, Oliver Cromwell, and Sir Arthur Hazelrig, upon a charge of treason. I see that the birds have flown. Mr. Speaker, where are these gentlemen?
May it please your Majesty, I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak, except as this House gives me leave.
Well, sir, I have eyes. I see that one of them is here. Captain?
Take him. Any action against any member of this House is a breach of privilege. And I move this House declares as public enemies any who lay hands upon its members. And I further move that any such action against this House be considered a crime against the people and treason against this nation.
So be it. Mr. Speaker, you will inform the members of this House that their presence is no longer required by the nation. This Parliament is, by my authority, terminated, dissolved.
Your Majesty, are you aware that by your action in this House today, you may have pushed this nation to the brink of civil war?
Well, John, just wow.
Yes, and Martin, but in terms of the last couple of days, I mean, you and I have been talking about this, and I asked you about when you were growing up in terms of England, and you were being taught about English history, and were you taught the significance of when King Charles actually attempted to take soldiers into Parliament and arrest people for speaking ill against the King, and what are the political implications from that?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I was taught history in the UK, of course, as part of the education system there. There was a lot about the figures and the facts of who it was, when it was, but nothing about the political context and nothing about the threats to democracy. Although, I mean, those were not covered at all in the history of the UK. Very interesting.
Yes. Now, obviously, the English Civil War was between the King and the Parliament ultimately won. And so, just like how you said in the last show, on the 30th of January 1649, King Charles I was beheaded, and the only monarch to be beheaded by the English people. So obviously that was a significant moment in the sense that they must have been dealing with an absolute tyrant because in more than 1,000 years they've only done that once, and obviously King Charles I really pushed the envelope, and so because he pushed the envelope and because Parliament won the Civil War, there was the 1688 Bill of Rights, and those Bill of Rights have a number of articles which still carry on through to the Australian legal and political system today, because obviously we've inherited our system in terms of from England. And so Article 9 of the Bill of Rights, if we can put slide 1 on the screen, Martin, it talks about parliamentary proceedings. It says, quote, that the freedom of speech in debates or proceedings in Parliament ought not to be impeached or questioned in any court or place out of Parliament. And so that's why, because of this Article 9 of the Bill of Rights, that's why you can say anything in Parliament, and that whatever you say, it is inadmissible in a court of law. So if someone says, I'm going to sue you because you said something about me, well, you've got to specify to the court, who said it, when did they say it, and what did they specifically say. So you need evidence of a defamatory statement. Well, if something is said in Parliament, that has absolute privilege, which means that whatever is said in Parliament cannot be used in court. And that's why parliamentarians carry, they carry immense power and they carry immense responsibility in holding that power, because they can do things in that chamber. And again, when I say Parliament, just because you're a politician, you have to actually be in the chamber. So you actually have to be in the Senate chamber, or you have to be in the House of Reps. So if a politician was to do a press conference, say here in Wollongong, and they said something defamatory about Martin North, because they didn't actually say it in the actual chamber, you could sue them for defamation. So, but it is actually physically in the Parliament. That's when you have that privilege. And one thing, if I can give a bit of a clue, Martin, is that when we talk about this immense responsibility that parliamentarians have, parliamentarians have to have good character. They have to be, they have to be above reproach, but they also have to be smart enough to carry that responsibility. And I think we're going to come back to that theme in the next couple of months about character and intelligence, because this is part of the heart of what I was looking at.
Yeah, and that's very important to underscore, isn't it, John? That what is said in those chambers is protected, right? And you say can never be actually in any way pursued, but it is on the record, right? Because Hansard will actually record what is said in those institutions. Yes. Now the other critical thing is that, and in terms of what I did in terms of this week is that it's not just, for Martin, what is said in the chamber. It is also the proceedings of the Parliament, which includes committees, which includes inquiries. But it is also not just the elected officials. It's what people it's what the Australian people tell the Parliament. That is what is also protected. Now, in early December, just so I was crystal clear, because this issue had come up when I was talking with various people about preparing submissions, I emailed the Clerk of the Senate, and the Clerk of the Senate is basically the top officer of the Senate, who is the authority on all these matters. So I asked about, because I wrote to the Clerk and I said, the Senate Economics References Committee has written to me and invited me to put in a submission to the inquiry. So I just want to be clear about what is parliamentary privilege, and how rock solid is it? And so I got a long email, and we're going to just read 2 excerpts of the email. So here's, if we put slide 2 on the screen, Martin. So this is part 1 of what we're going to read out. Is quote, this is from the Clerk of the Senate. Dear Mr. Adams, your assessment is correct. Absolute privilege attaches to the proceedings of the Commonwealth Parliament under Article 9 of the Bill of Rights, as explicitly in Section 16 of the Parliamentary Privileges Act 1987. Quote, in other words, absolute privilege attaches to a witness in preparing or making a submission, attaches to a committee in receiving, considering, and publishing a submission, and attaches to the submission itself if it is published by a committee or by the Senate. Similarly, a report quoting or referring to a submission is covered by absolute privilege when published by
a committee or by the Senate. So the protection, Martin, is not just when you send it into Parliament and when it is accepted. If you're working on your home computer and you're typing up a document for the purposes of the inquiry, and somehow someone got your computer, the fact that you can say to a court, this document was in preparation to tell the Parliament truths about certain people. The preparation of that document is also protected as well. So when people and you've spoken to certain people, I've spoken to certain people. These case studies that people want to tell the inquiry about in terms of ASIC, they name certain companies and certain individuals where people have gone to ASIC and said someone's doing something wrong. Please investigate. ASIC's done nothing. So people should feel be crystal clear, but also absolutely confident that with this privilege, because of what King Charles did back in the 17th century, people can go to Parliament and say anything and everything. Now, it is still up to the Parliament's discretion and the committee's discretion as to whether they want to accept the submission or not. But if we go back to the title of the show, speaking the complete and ultimate truth to power, it can only happen in one place. And so we've seen, for example, Martin, in the last 12 months, certain YouTube personalities, mixed in with the pandemic, but also in terms of other matters, get into legal hot water because they said certain things in public. And they wanted to stand up against the regime, and certain people have been arrested. Some people have been, one person's now hiding in the Russian consulate, trying to evade New South Wales police on a whole range of matters. And so in those situations, if people are frustrated with the system and they're frustrated with the direction of the country, people want to speak out against those of the ruling elite. But if you understand the Constitution and you understand the history of England and Australia, there is a very particular and deliberate way to do it in a way that you can achieve the objective of challenging those in power, but doing it in a way that gives you the most protection possible, both in terms of physical and legal risk. And so that's what I did. That's what I was able to achieve this week. Mr. Flett from the Wolf of Woy plans to do that in probably in the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks as well. And now, obviously, we have the situation where the inquiry, the committee members, the 6 members of the committee, the 6 senators, they are now in receipt of my submission and other submissions, which name a whole host of people in particularly in corporate Australia, but in my case, in terms of in the political circles as well. And it'll be very interesting to see how mature this committee is to actually accepting those submissions, processing them and managing them in the proper fashion, and whether we can actually achieve real reform by actually exposing, not just the problems we know about, but the problems that you and I know about, but the public at large have no idea about.
Very important, John. And I just want to say one thing. I've had a few people who are worrying about, if they make a submission, etc., and they've actually spoken to a lawyer. Some of the lawyers in Australia don't understand this issue of parliamentary privilege, in my view, and the protection it offers. And so they get all sort of iffy so it's really important that people understand this is a legitimate mechanism to be able to table information directly to Parliament, and there is maximum protection there.
Yes. I mean, I was involved in a situation where I was dealing with someone back in November, December, and that person was on the phone with various lawyers and barristers about their submission to a different inquiry, and one of the barristers basically said, "Well, there could be some legal risks around this," and I just thought, so when I caught up with the barrister, I think that in the following day, I said, what court case can you cite where someone saying something to Parliament, will cause trouble? So he cites something, and I read it, and that, but it didn't say anything about any legal risk, and that's why I decided to email the clerk of the Senate. And obviously, the clerk is crystal clear that you have all the protection in the world. If you say what you want to say to Parliament, but still it has to be it has to be based on facts. It has to be based on evidence. It has to be put together carefully. So I don't think politicians will accept statements that are careless or reckless. So it still has to be done in the proper way. But if it's done in the proper way, you have the opportunity to really expose the big problems in this country, whether they're corrupt or not, and hopefully we can get a better country when we get to the end of the process.
Absolutely, John. The battle continues in the interest of the people.
100%.
Martin North, John Adams, interest of people. We'll see you next time.